Boxwood blight, caused by the fungal pathogen Calonectria pseudonaviculata, results in severe defoliation and dieback to boxwood and other related genera in the boxwood family. Affected genera include Buxus, Pachysandra, and Sarcococca. The pathogen was first described in the United Kingdom and New Zealand in the mid to late 1990s and has since spread throughout Europe and most recently to North America in 2011. Since its detection in North America in the fall of 2011, boxwood blight has been found in 12 U.S. states and 3 Canadian provinces. The disease has been found in both nurseries and landscapes. Because of its cultural significance and continued popularity as an ornamental plant, boxwood is an economically significant crop to the North American nursery and landscape industries with a wholesale value of $103 million in the United States. The recent discovery of boxwood blight in North America is thus of great concern. As with any new disease, estimating the potential economic loss due to this pathogen is difficult. With that said, the potential losses are significant. Actual direct losses have already been realized by growers who have destroyed hundreds of thousands of plants throughout the U.S. in an attempt to eradicate the boxwood blight pathogen in nurseries. If boxwood blight becomes widely established in nurseries, direct primary losses will be realized from decreased plant quality due to defoliation. Secondary losses from control costs associated with fungicide applications and soil contamination will also be an added expense to industry. In colonial America, boxwood was planted extensively as an ornamental. Today, the plant remains a dominant component of historical gardens at sites such as Mount Vernon, Colonial Williamsburg, and the White House. Indirect losses associated with poor aesthetics and impacts on tourism are other potential losses that will be hard to measure but will likely have a significant impact on regional economies. In this presentation, we will explore the biology of boxwood blight and utilize this knowledge to develop strategies to manage this disease. Let's begin by investigating the disease cycle of boxwood blight. The boxwood blight fungus sporulates from infected leaves or stems during warm, moist conditions. The pathogen is most active at temperatures from about 64 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Spores, known as conidiaspores of the pathogen, are typically dispersed by water droplets splashed during rain or irrigation events to adjacent leaves and stems of boxwood. Once dispersed, the conidia germinate on leaves and stems and infect host tissue. The conidia need moisture to germinate, indicating the leaf and stem tissue likely need to be wet for infection to occur. Once a leaf becomes infected, leaf spots form. Infected stems develop elongated dark cankers. The infection cycle previously described repeats itself many times during a single growing season, as long as conditions are wet and the temperatures are optimal. Infected leaves eventually become completely blighted, often within several days. The leaves fall to the ground, resulting in defoliated plants. The boxwood blight pathogen forms a second type of spore or propagule called mycosclerotia in the tissues of leaves and stems. These resting propagules allow the pathogen to persist in soil long after the leaves decompose. Boxwood blight mycosclerotia have been demonstrated to persist in soil for at least 6 years. However, based on the biology of related species, the span likely lasts at least a decade. Fallen leaves and pieces of stem harbor the mycosclerotia, enabling the pathogen to overwinter. The mycosclerotia persists once the leaves break down, providing a source of inoculum that produces conidia in the spring to initiate the disease cycle all over again. The pathogen can also persist and overwinter in infected stem lesions on living and dead boxwood plants. If boxwood blight produced one round of inoculum each year, the disease would likely be managed reasonably well by eradicating inoculum present in fallen leaf debris and culling infected plants and limbs. However, as previously mentioned, after leaves and stems are infected, they will produce more conidiaspores, and the infection cycle repeats itself many times during the same growing season, as long as conditions are wet and temperatures are suitable for infection. Diseases with multiple disease cycles per growing season, like boxwood blight, are called polycyclic diseases. Polycyclic diseases follow the characteristic patterns of disease development. An understanding of these patterns and how they relate to disease development can help us develop disease management practices specifically suited for Boxwood blight. We will now consider disease development of a polycyclic disease like Boxwood blight during a typical growing season. Here we are looking at a generic disease progress curve for a polycyclic disease, which we will generalize upon without going into details on the equations that can be used to model them. During a single growing season, disease levels increase relatively slowly at first, but then increase very quickly, reaching exponential growth and leveling off over time as the amount of disease plant material becomes saturated. In Boxwood blight, disease level could be expressed as number or percent blighted leaves. Certain management strategies will have different effects on the disease progress of polycyclic diseases. Again, we will generalize upon the relationships of the disease progress and management without going into details on equations used to model these interactions. For a polycyclic disease like Boxwood blight, reducing the initial amount of inoculum present at the beginning of the growing season will likely delay the disease progress curve. But because the disease progress curve follows an exponential growth pattern, if even the smallest amount of inoculum is left behind to infect a boxwood, if unmanaged, the disease levels will eventually reach high levels by the end of the growing season under favorable conditions. Say, for example, Boxwood blight was introduced to a site, and we removed all the inoculum and destroyed all the infected plants. If a trace of infested leaf debris was left behind, the disease could theoretically build back rapidly on any remaining plants under weather conditions favorable for disease development. Because Boxwood blight is a polycyclic disease, it can be very difficult to control the disease by eradication alone. Management must be coupled with other strategies. This is why exclusion, keeping the disease from being introduced to a site, is often preferred, despite the potential inconvenience or cost involved. We will cover all of the management options available for excluding and mitigating Boxwood blight in a moment, but first let's look more at disease progress curves as they relate to disease management theory. In addition to reducing initial inoculum levels, which would be considered a form of eradication or sanitation, the broader alternative method for inhibiting disease progress curve is reducing the rate of infection. Again, without going into detail on the equations used to model these trends, to reduce the rate of infection, one needs to implement a management strategy such as applying fungicides or reducing leaf wetness period or planting resistant or tolerant cultivars. When we reduce the rate of infection using one of these strategies, the slope of the polycyclic disease progress curve will decrease. This results in decreased progress lower than if no action was taken or if inoculum was reduced. The more effective a strategy is at reducing the rate of infection, the more reduction in disease progress, which means we have done a better job managing the disease. Now, if both the rate of infection and initial inoculum levels are reduced, we'll likely see an even greater reduction in disease at the end of the growing season. Now we have looked at the effects of reducing inoculum and infection rates on disease development of a polycyclic disease. It hopefully is clear that because we are dealing with a polycyclic disease, Boxwood blight disease can progress rapidly during a growing season if left unchecked. Reducing inoculum alone through eradication and sanitation, while useful and recommended component of any management plan, may have minimal impact during wet years unless all the inoculum is completely eradicated, which is very difficult and often impractical. Reducing the infection rate will thus be crucial at sites where the disease is introduced and should be combined with eradication efforts. With that said, and with this background and understanding of disease dynamics of Boxwood blight, let's now look at strategies to keep this disease out of your nursery or landscape and ways to reduce infection rates and eradicate inoculum of this disease if it is introduced to your site. On this slide, we see disease progress in boxwood under two management regimes. On the top, eradication of infected plants and fungicide applications were used to manage the disease. On the bottom slide, we see an adjacent site where eradication of symptomatic plants was attempted the previous year, but some inoculum was left behind and the disease was able to develop during the current growing season. This illustrates the importance of not relying on eradication alone. There are 5 main types of management strategies for any disease. Each of these can be employed to manage boxwood blight. These include exclusion, eradication, protection, resistance, and avoidance. A good management plan will employ a combination of these strategies. We will start off by going over strategies to exclude boxwood blight from your nursery or landscape, as this is by far the preferred method for managing this disease. Exclusion is a management strategy that aims to keep a pathogen out of a nursery or landscape. There are regulatory control activities, a clean stock program, inspection and scouting, on-site quarantines, and various cultural techniques that can be used to exclude boxwood blight from nurseries and landscapes. Boxwood blight is a non-quarantine regulated plant pathogen in most states. This means that there are no significant quarantines restricting the movement of boxwood blight material or requirements for infected plant material to be destroyed in landscapes. However, state regulatory officials enforce a zero-tolerance policy for the pathogen in nurseries under the authority of existing laws and statutes. In practice, this means that even the lowest amount of disease found by state inspectors on boxwood will trigger stop sale of the plant material in a nursery setting. The regulation of boxwood blight in nurseries is an important tool to protect consumers from buying infected plants and to reduce the spread of this disease through nursery stock. Growers, landscapers, and consumers can help regulatory officials by reporting plants they believe may be infected by boxwood blight. Helping regulatory officials locate infected plants in the landscape provides a starting point for conducting a trace-back investigation to locate the source of infected plants. In order to avoid buying infected planting stock and to aid in identifying boxwood blight disease at the early stages to avoid the unintentional spread of infected plant material, it is crucial to learn the signs and symptoms of boxwood blight and inspect plants regularly. Signs and symptoms of boxwood blight include leaf spots, defoliation, and elongated cankers. While inspecting and scouting are useful tools, relying on symptoms alone may not pick up latent or low-level infections. This is why it is crucial to implement the additional clean stock program and cultural methods outlined below. Another major strategy one can employ to exclude boxwood blight from nurseries or landscapes is to buy plant stock from production nurseries enrolled in a clean stock program, or to enroll in a clean stock program in the case of a production nursery. A clean stock program has been developed for boxwood blight known as the Boxwood Blight Cleanliness Program Compliance Agreement for Production Nurseries. This program utilizes a systems approach to prevent the spread of boxwood blight by nursery stock. This compliance agreement template was developed by the National Plant Board in cooperation with the nursery industry, and this program is being implemented in Virginia by the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. In other states, when offered, the program is administered by the local state Department of Agriculture. The Boxwood Blight Cleanliness Program is a voluntary program, and participating nurseries agree to use best management practices to reduce the risk of introducing and spreading boxwood blight. The program is coupled with inspections and audits by the State Department of Agriculture to ensure the program requirements are followed. If you are a production nursery entering this clean stock program and strictly adhering to the program requirements will go a long ways towards excluding this disease. To learn more about the Boxwood Blight Cleanliness Program Compliance Agreement for Production Nurseries, or to view a copy of the agreement and associated best management practices, visit the website link shown at the top of this slide. The Boxwood Blight Cleanliness Program Compliance Agreement for Production Nurseries utilizes best management practices to exclude boxwood blight from nurseries that can be applied by production nurseries that choose not to enroll the program for various reasons, and by wholesale and retail nurseries or even landscape companies and hobbyists or homeowners who are not eligible to enroll in the program. All of the management strategies covered in the agreement are presented throughout this presentation. One key exclusion strategy included within the cleanliness program that is not covered in the following cultural methods section is the practice of holding incoming plant material under quarantine for 30 days before releasing the stock into the production areas of nurseries. New material purchased or bought in from off-site should be held under quarantine in an isolated area, at least 3 meters, but preferably farther from other host plants for 30 days during periods while conditions are favorable for disease development. This is a good strategy to protect your nursery or landscape from introducing latent or low-level infections of boxwood blight that inspections cannot pick up. There are several other additional strategies broadly considered cultural that can be used to exclude boxwood blight from your nursery or landscape, all of which are required by participants of the Boxwood Blight Cleanliness Program Compliance Agreement for Production Nurseries as well. We will go over these now. First, avoid buying and bringing in boxwood host material from off-site. If new boxwood material is needed, cuttings can be taken from plants on site to propagate new plants. Whenever possible, this policy should be implemented as moving living boxwood plants poses the greatest risk for introducing this disease. Clean and sanitize all equipment, tools, and boots before entering production areas of nurseries or landscapes with high-value boxwood. A list of sanitizers will be covered in the eradication section. In this photo, sanitizer is being applied to rubber boots before the workers return to a boxwood nursery field. Note that the other worker is wearing disposable boot covers, which are an alternative to sanitizing boots between site visits. Another important aspect of excluding boxwood blight is to limit access to production areas of nurseries to essential staff and visitors. Furthermore, vehicles and other large pieces of equipment should not enter production areas of a nursery unless it is absolutely necessary and they have been cleaned and sanitized. If exclusion strategies fail, a successful management plan will employ a combination of eradication, protection, resistance, and avoidance strategies to manage boxwood blight. We begin by considering eradication and protection, as these strategies apply to short-term management of the disease, while resistance and avoidance generally focus on long-term approaches to reduce disease levels. Eradication of inoculum is among the first steps that should be taken to manage boxwood blight once introduced to a nursery or landscape. In nursery settings, it is crucial to destroy all plant materials showing signs of infection to protect consumers from buying infected material and to reduce inoculum reservoirs that will threaten future crops. The plant material should be burned or buried. If possible, it is best to bag the plant material as soon as possible to contain falling leaf litter using large contractor-grade garbage bags. Once the bulk infected plant material is destroyed, the fallen leaf litter and bits of stem must be gathered and destroyed as well. This part of the eradication process will be the most tedious. Rakes can be used to gather as much of the fallen leaf litter as possible. The leaf litter should then be burned or buried. Residual leaf litter can be destroyed using an agricultural flamer. Research has shown that flaming the soil surface can significantly reduce inoculum of the boxwood blight pathogen. In a landscape, choices can be made regarding the extent of eradication. The goal often will be to reduce as much of inoculum as possible while minimizing the impact on the aesthetics of the site. If the infected boxwood is an old, established specimen, sections of the infected plants can be cut and removed, leaving the rest of the plant. Alternatively, the entire plant can be destroyed. If only the symptomatic parts of infected plants are removed, the rest of the plant and other adjacent boxwood in the landscape should be protected using foliar fungicide applications, which will be discussed in detail in the production section of this presentation. In this picture, we see an American boxwood in which symptomatic branches were selectively pruned off. The fallen leaves have been raked and residual debris burned using an agricultural flamer. All equipment that is used to handle the leaf debris and other tissue debris should be thoroughly cleaned and sanitized using one of the following sanitizers at the rate shown or at the highest rate indicated on the label. This list of sanitizers has been found to be effective at killing the boxwood blight pathogen by researchers at the Connecticut Agricultural Experimental Station. All of the sanitizers listed here, Lysol concentrate is perhaps the most or the best option because it is not corrosive to metal equipment and readily available at many retail stores. As covered earlier in this presentation, for most effective management, eradication of boxwood blight inoculum must be coupled with strategies to reduce the rate of infection. We will focus on these strategies for the rest of this presentation as we consider protection, resistance, and avoidance. For protection, we will consider reducing leaf wetness period and fungicides, both of which effectively reduce the rate of infection of boxwood blight. This translates into effective disease management. Boxwood blight is a pathogen that requires free moisture to infect leaves. For this reason, taking measures to reduce leaf wetness will protect the plant from reducing the rate of infection and greatly limiting disease progress. Methods for reducing leaf wetness include limiting the use of overhead irrigation and timing overhead irrigation to reduce leaf wetness period. Limiting overhead irrigation and maximizing the use of drip irrigation is an effective way to reduce leaf wetness period. However, it is not always practical in containerized production systems or when propagating cuttings. When overhead irrigation cannot be avoided, overhead irrigation should be timed to reduce leaf wetness period. The best timing of overhead irrigation to reduce leaf wetness period is typically very late at night or in the early morning period before dew has dried from the leaves. Producing plants under minimal shade and increasing air circulation helps to dry foliage faster and reduce the leaf wetness period as well. In this picture, boxwood blight was developed most aggressively on the northwestern side of closely spaced boxwood in a nursery. The plants are shaded on the northwestern side by a row of trees, which prevents late-day sun from reaching the northwestern side of the plants. More sun and wider spacing may have promoted drying on all sides of the plants and reduced disease development in this case. Fungicides can be used to protect plants when applied thoroughly before spores land on plants. It is not currently recommended that nurseries use fungicides on boxwood, as they may mask symptoms and make it hard for inspection and scouting activities to detect the presence of the disease. This could result in infected plants being sold to consumers, spreading the disease to new areas. We saw this slide before. The picture on the bottom demonstrates disease development in boxwood that were not treated with fungicides versus boxwood that were on the top photo. Both groups of plants were near each other under similar shade, light, and inoculum pressure. Fungicides are a good option to reduce disease progress in landscapes where the pathogen has been introduced. Research trials conducted by North Carolina State University has shown that the following fungicides, out of several tested, are effective at protecting plants from infection. To reduce and slow the buildup of fungicide resistance, it is recommended that fungicide chemistries are rotated regularly. Read and follow all label instructions. More information and details on boxwood blight fungicide testing and efficacy can be found at the link at the bottom of this slide. A long-term approach to consider when planting future crops and replanting current landscapes to reduce the rate of infection of boxwood blight is to grow indoor plant cultivars resistant to boxwood blight. Work conducted at North Carolina State University has shown that older cultivars planted in landscapes since colonial times, such as American and English boxwood, are among the most susceptible to boxwood blight. Research conducted at North Carolina State University has found that some of the cultivars of Buxus microphylla, such as Golden Dream, Winter Gem, and John Baldwin, as well as some of the open growth forms of Buxus sempervirens, such as Derunk and Fastigiata, show resistance to boxwood blight. For details on relative resistance of boxwood blight varieties to boxwood blight, visit the link shown at the bottom of this page. Another long-term strategy to consider for landscapes is to avoid planting boxwood in shady, damp microsites. This is another strategy to reduce the rate of infection of this polycyclic disease. Anecdotal observations suggest that boxwood planted in full sun develop very little disease compared to boxwood planted in shaded areas in landscape plantings. In summary, we have considered 5 management strategies for managing boxwood blight. Exclusion of this disease is always preferred. However, if the disease is introduced, eradication, along with protection, resistance, and avoidance, should be used in combination to manage boxwood blight. The production system or landscape should also be taken into consideration. Given the polycyclic nature of this disease and the difficulty of eradicating the pathogen, eradication alone will likely be insufficient to manage this disease to acceptable levels. Instead, eradication combined with protection measures should be used in established landscapes and when growing susceptible hosts. Growing and planting tolerant cultivars and choosing planting sites that are inhospitable to the pathogen are suitable long-term approaches for managing boxwood blight.